After completing my 10th class exams in 1979, my father suggested that I go and help my father's uncle and learn astrology. Mathematics being my favorite subject, I learned the calculations. My grandfather taught me how to calculate the inclinations of each planet and how to calculate the Lagna and the meridian center MC. And he gave me some birth charts to draw. Thus, I learned how to draw the birth charts first and showed interest in predictions. So my grandfather told me some predictions, some of the tips that he usually uses for predictions. And after learning those tips, I documented some of them. I verified with my father. While my father and my grandfather have laid the foundation for me to get interested in astrology, for almost a decade or 2 decades, I didn't show any interest. Welcome to Sastry Karra's astrological series. As usual, for the past 6 to 7 years, I am posting a number of videos in my YouTube channel, and which are free for most of them. And apart from that, earlier to that, I did post some scribed articles in the scribed website, and which I came to know that people are getting charged for downloading my articles. Recently, I started a website www.karraastrology.com. I'll repeat again, www.karraastrology. Karra Astrology is all one word. Karraastrology.com is my new website, and most of the information pertaining to me, whether it is in the articles in the WordPress or in Scribd or the recent YouTube presentations that had been posted in my channel, all of those are available in my website. And apart from that, I started a new paid consultation, and the payments will be when I tell my what is my fees. The payment should be paid either to an orphanage in India. I will provide the address for that payment details, or to the homeless center here in New Jersey. So for those who are residing in India, they will be paying to an orphanage in Hyderabad, and for those who are residing outside India, they have to pay to a homeless center here in New Jersey. So if you are interested to get paid consultation, please visit my website and click the contact me button, and then provide all the information over there. To the extent possible, I will be responding at the most within 3 to 5 business days. Thank you very much. I'm hoping that you will like my presentations, and this is some presentation which I'm going to post it within as soon as I can. Welcome to Sastry Karra's astrological series. In this presentation, I'm going to explain what are the techniques that we can use from an astrological perspective to figure it out if there is a possibility for a native to accumulate wealth or have a financial gains during his or her lifetime. Welcome to Sastry Karra's astrological series. This is the presentation about a change in the financial status in a particular native's life. Everybody wants to become rich, especially in the modern days. These days, people are very eager to figure it out how they can become rich easily, quickly. And there are certain, from astrological perspective, there are certain planetary combinations that will tell when the native financial status will change from lower end to the higher end, and those particular planetary combinations will be effective only when that particular planetary mahadasa is running. So for example, If the planetary combination says that Jupiter is the planet that is responsible for changing in the financial status for a NATO, we have to wait for the Jupiter Mahadasa to come. And that's another reason why when a number of people keep saying that there is a Maharaja Yoga or Viparita Raja Yoga in the NATO's chart, and they are not able to notice any change in their life or in their financial status, the reason why they are not seeing is because the Maharaja Viparita Raja Yoga or just the Raja Yoga is not being cooperated by the Vimsotari Dasa, Mahadasa, whatever the Mahadasa is running at that time. So there are some people, particularly who are in astrology profession, who try to exploit these type of planetary combinations. It's personally, I think it is unethical. So I'm using this presentation, I'm trying to let the people who have a basic concept about astrology to understand why such fake astrologers or unethical people who are trying to cheat, not to become a prey to those people. Here I will be trying to use some of the techniques that were already known to a number of Hindu astrologers, and I will try to provide some additional examples so that by going through the theory and then explaining the same theory with few examples will be very helpful for those who are learning astrology through my educational videos presentations. So what exactly is going to happen for a particular NATO when there is a change in financial situation? Our ancient rishis have developed a unique method, and using in that method, the first and the foremost they do is they calculate a lagna, special lagna called the Indu Lagna, and from Indu Lagna they do check for the most important two houses, the 9th house, which is the Bhagyasthanamo, and the 11th house, which is the Labhasthanamo, and identify who are the lords for the 9th and 11th houses from Indu Lagna, and then which planets are residing in the first house, that means in the in Lagna, and using those planets list, identify, go back to the Vimsotari Dasa and figure it out when is that those planets Mahadasa is running and Antardasa is running, and that is the time according to our rishis and the classical text. That's the exact time when the possibility is extremely high for the NATO to have a change in the financial status. 19, if the planets are benefic planets, then it will be a increase in the change in the financial status from a positive perspective. If the planets are malefic, then it will be financial losses, loss in wealth and or loss in some financial assets. Now the first thing, what are the rules to follow while doing the analysis or predicting this? First and the foremost, what you have to see is, once you calculate the Indu Lagna, in that Indu Lagna, how many planets are residing? Are there any planets residing? The first thing, if the planets are residing, what are those? Are they malefic or a benefic? Those are the two things, that a malefic or a benefic, that's all. And then go and look at the 9th house lord, 9th house and the 10th house and also the 11th house. The 10th house is because most of the financial gains is presumed through career, so the 10th house is needed. 9th house is Bhagyasthanamo, 11th house is Labhasthanamo. I also look at the 2nd house, which is the Dhanasthanamo, because it is the wealth accumulation that is through inheritance. That's a possibility for the NATO to suddenly acquire wealth through inheritance. So that's another possibility. So those are the two: 2nd house, 9th house, 10th house and 11th house. These are the four houses that I look apart from the first house. Once these are all done, I look for the Jupiter. Jupiter is the most benefic planet for any person in the natal chart. So if you between the age 16 and 46, that is 30 years, during those 30 years, if the NATO has Jupiter Mahadas are running during those 30 years, and there is some sort of a relationship between the Indu Lagna or Indu Lagnadipati and Jupiter, or the houses owned by Jupiter, then the chances are extremely high for the native to have a drastic change, positive side, drastic positive change in his or her financial status. This is the rule of thumb when I looked at the Indu Lagna. In this presentation, I had given 4 examples, and all the 4 examples is with Jupiter Mahadasa running between the age of 16 and 46. 30 years. In those 30 years, I had picked 4 examples whose Jupiter Mahadasa is running and who have a direct relationship with the Indu Lagna or the Indu Lagnadipati, and showed how that relationship has caused the native to have a drastic change in his or her financial status. I'm sure that you will be liking this presentation like the other ones, and let me know if there is anything that you think is gaining off with this particular presentation. The very first example I want to take to do the analysis and explain how the rule works is that of a famous South Indian hero called Rajnikant. He is one of the famous hero in South India, and a little bit people in the Bollywood might have heard him too. He is one of the person that I had did a lot of research when it comes to the topic called from rags to riches, which I'm going to do it very soon. And there is also already a book called From Bus Driver to a Film Star. This book is very famous, is right now very famous in Tamil Nadu, and there is a chapter also about Rajnikant in the high school, in one of the school syllabus. As I said, here is just a little bit introduction about him. I'm 100% sure a lot of people who are in India, especially in South India, don't need any introduction about this gentleman. And for the Bollywood industry, people who are in North India or who has little knowledge about South Indian film heroes, Rajnikant is one of the famous film actor. He was born in Karnataka, in Mysore to be Bangalore to be precise, and initially he was a bus driver and became one of the most famous actor and one of the most richest person in the entertainment industry. The most important thing here I want to tell here is there is, as I said earlier, in the school curriculum, there is I think this is for the sixth graders in Tamil Nadu. They say in the book they call something called as the dignity of work, and in the dignity of work they had a section called from bus conductor to a film star. The reason was there a lot of people do respect him for his character and how he, even though he became a multimillionaire, how he still respects the people who helped him when he was a common man, especially one of his friend with whom he spent most of his lifetime when he was a bus conductor. And while that was his character, I'm going to take from the astrological perspective using Indu Lagna why this particular native turned from a bus conductor to a multimillionaire, such a rich person, from rags to riches. First and the foremost, the birth chart of the birth details of this famous actor Rajnikant. I got it from Astro Data Bank, which you can see it here. It has 12th December 1950, and using J-Hora software, we don't need to figure it out how to calculate the Indu Lagna. Yes, there are some 10 books that explain how to, once you draw the natal chart, how to calculate the Indu Lagna, and I don't need to do that, because thanks to the J Hora software and the J Hora software author Sri P.V. Narasimha Rao Garu, and with his help and his hard work, uh, people who are using J Hora software do not need to worry about how to do all these calculations. Here on the screen you can see that according to J Hora software, the Indu Lagna is Aquarius. So the very first thing I did here is, after generating his D1 chart, I highlighted the Indu Lagna. So the Indu Lagna is Aquarius. That means Saturn is the Lagnadipati. That's the very first thing. As soon as once you see what is the Indu Lagna, the immediate thing is to look for the Lagnadipati. The Lagnadipati Saturn is in the 8th house from Indu Lagna, and he's having a direct, since the Lagnadipati is in the 8th house from Indu Lagna, he's having a direct aspect on the 2nd house, which is the Dhanasthanadipati. So, and unfortunately for this particular native, in the 2nd house, the native has Rahu. So the Dhanasthanamu, in Dhanasthanamu, because Rahu is residing there, the financial situation for this particular native is always like a sine wave. It goes ups and downs. It's not stable, consistent. Sometimes it will reach its peak and something happens, then it will fall down and goes up again. That's the overall financial status for this particular native. Now coming back to this Indu Lagna, the Indu Lagnadipati is Saturn. He is in the 8th house. And then let's go and look at is there any planet residing in the 1st house? Jupiter, the 2nd house lord, Dhanasthanadipati Jupiter, one of the most benefic planet and the best planet, as I said earlier, is residing in the 1st house. So the Dhanasthanadipati and also Jupiter is the 11th house lord, that is the Labhasthanadipati. When Labhasthanadipati and Dhanasthanadipati is a benefic planet, especially if it is a Jupiter and it is having a direct relationship with Indu Lagna or Indu Lagnadipati, then the chances, as I said earlier, is 100% guaranteed that sometime during the Jupiter Mahadasa, whenever that Mahadasa comes, this particular native is going to have a sudden rise in his or her financial situations. And also, since Jupiter is residing in the 1st house, its 9th aspect is again on the 9th house. And then the 9th house is Libra. The 9th house lord is Venus. And let's go and look at where is the 9th house lord residing. The 9th house lord is residing in the house owned by Jupiter, and the 9th house lord is residing in Labhasthanamu. See, the Bhagyasthanadipati Venus is residing in Labhasthanamu, and the Labhasthanadipati is looking at the Bhagyasthanamu. This is the very strong combination for this particular native to say that one day, someday, soon, this particular native will become the one of the most richest person in the world. As I said, someday soon, this particular person is going to become one of the most richest man in this world. And so that day has to come. And like I said, you have to wait for the Jupiter Mahadasa to come. And if the Jupiter Mahadasa is between the age of 16 and 46, that is during the 30 years, if the Jupiter Mahadasa comes, then that any native will become and has a linkage, this type of a strong bondage between the Dhanasthanamu, Dhanasthanamu, Labhasthanamu, Bhagyasthanamu and Indu Lagna residing in the 1st house, then the Jupiter Mahadasha will be the brightest for the native. Here, this native's Jupiter Mahadasa started in 1983. It went all the way till 1999. Those 16 years are the years when this particular native career has changed and became very famous and had a lot of financial gains, accumulated a lot of wealth. And you can see the reason is because of this Jupiter having being the lord of the 2nd and 9th house, 11th house, residing in the 1st house, and Jupiter's 9th aspect is on Libra, owned by Venus, and Venus, the 9th house lord Venus, is residing in the Labhasthanamu 11th house, and it also co-joined with the most important thing is how does this Netu will get them wealth accumulated or the financial gains. Here if you look at it, the Bhagyasthanadipati is residing in Labhasthanamu, 11th house, and co-joined with Mercury. By default, Mercury means communications. So some sort of a communication is the source for the Netu to become rich. And then comes Mercury owns the, apart from owning the 8th house, Mercury also owns the 5th house. 5th house is sports and entertainments, arts, sports and entertainment. So out of these three industries, sports, arts, entertainment. Oh, by the way, 5th house also deals with higher education, so academics and research. So the Netu has 5 fields: sports, arts, entertainment, academics, and research institutions. So out of these 5 industries, whatever the Netu has chosen will be the one. Whatever the industry that the Netu has chosen, in that industry, the Netu will be making a lot of money, accumulating a lot of wealth, and will become one of the most richest person. The reason the Netu has chosen entertainment is because the 5th house lord has co-joined with Venus. Venus is by default arts and entertainment, and of course it is the creativity also comes into picture. Had the Netu has chosen academics or research, then he would have become one of the most famous scientists, because creativity is the one that comes into picture at that time. So overall, this using the Indu Lagna, this is how you can predict the sudden increase in a Netu's financial status. Kendra and Trikona houses are very important when we are looking at any chart, and especially if the chart that we are looking for any major event in his or her lifetime. Here, when we are looking at from Indu Lagna, I do follow the same principle. So for this Netu Rajnikant, let's go and look at from Indu Lagna, what are the Kendra and Trikona houses, and how are they playing, how did they play an important role for this particular Netu to from being a bus conductor to one of the most richest person in South India. The Kendra houses are the 1st, 4th, 7th and 10th houses. Here for this particular Netu, the 1st house lord from with respect to Indu Lagna, the 1st house lord is Saturn, and the planet that is residing in the 1st house is Jupiter. Jupiter is the 2nd house lord. That's a very important. Dhanasthanadipati residing in the Lagna. And fortunately, no planet is aspecting the 1st house. And then comes the 4th house. Venus is the lord of the 4th house, and 4th house is empty. And the 7th house lord Sun is aspecting the 4th house. That's another thing that we have to see from here. And then comes the 7th house. Remember, 7th house is another Kendra house. So Sun, the Kendradipati Sun, the lord of the 7th house, is aspecting another 4th house, which is another Kendra house too. And then the Sun is the 7th house lord residing in the 10th house, which is another Kendra house, and the Sun who is aspecting the 10th house, Saturn. So the Lagnadipati is aspecting the South as the 10th house. So if you look just at the Kendra from Indu Lagna, the Kendra houses and the lords of for those houses, you can see how strong it is. The Lagnadipati Saturn is aspecting another Kendra house, the 10th house, which is career from Indu Lagna. And then the 7th house lord Sun is in the 10th house, career, and aspecting the 4th house. And then the 4th house lord is in the 11th house, that is the Labhasthanamu. That's another good thing. And then naturally in the 1st house you have the Dhanasthanadipati Jupiter. Now let's go to the Trikona houses. The 2 Trikona houses that I look, usually 1, 5 and 7 are considered to be Trikona houses. I eliminated 1 and just looked at the 5th and 9th houses. Fifth house lord is Mercury, which is, and the fifth house is empty. But look at the positive side of it. Venus and Mercury are residing in the 11th house, the Labasthanamu, and they are directly having a direct aspect on the fifth house. Mercury owns the fifth house, is residing in the 11th house and aspecting, looking at its own house. That's the reason why the Labasthanamu, residing in Labasthanamu, the fifth house lord is looking at its own house at the fifth house which it owns. That's the reason the fifth house became very strong for this particular native when it comes to financial gains. Fifth house deals with a lot of things when it comes to profession, like arts, entertainment. Fifth house also deals with academics and research, higher education, all those things. And then comes the ninth house. The ninth house lord is again Venus, Libra. Ninth house lord is again Venus, and the beauty here is Jupiter residing in the first house is looking at, with its ninth aspect, is looking at the ninth house. So you look at it, the Dhanasthanadipati is looking at the Bhagyasthanamu, which is the ninth house, and the Bhagyasthanadipati is Venus. Venus is residing in the house owned by Jupiter again. So from Kendra and Trikona houses perspective and their lord's perspective, the chart clearly tells you that this particular chart, the native is sure to become one of the richest person in the world. The second example I want to take, that I took for this presentation, is another South Indian famous actor. His name is Chiranjeevi. That was his movie name, but that's not his actual name. But all over South India, he's famous by the name Chiranjeevi, and he was famous sometime for some period to the North Indians too, because he formed a political party, co-joined I think with Congress somewhere, and yeah, things went that he tried to be some sort of a politician, did not work out. But basically this is the second example that I want to take and to explain how the rules of Indu Lagna and its relationship with the important planets has changed this particular native's financial situation from a lower end of the spectrum to the highest possible in the spectrum. Here you can see the source of his Wikipedia, and from Wikipedia I picked up a little bit information about him, and this particular photo is also from Wikipedia. He was born in India, in Andhra Pradesh, and he was came to Chennai in 1976 to pursue a career in acting. Look at this. He started his passion of becoming an actor by joining the Film Institute in 1976. His early career started in 1978. So keep in mind, his career started in 1978 and all the way till 1999, 1990 or 1995. He was in a positive direction, and he became one of the most famous actor, and his financial status has moved from a low end of the middle class family to one of the most richest person in South India. So using JHora software, I generated this chart. This was the birth details. I got it from Astro Data Bank, and as I said earlier, thanks to Sri P.V. Narasimharao Garu and his software JHora, which was easy, freely available for people like us to generate the birth charts, and the Indu Lagna was already calculated by the software. So if you look at the Indu Lagna is Aries. Since Aries is the Indu Lagna, the Lagnadipati is Mars. Mars is in the 5th house from Indu Lagna. That itself tells you that the native Lagnadipati residing in the 5th house, like I said earlier for Rajnikant, this particular native also has 5 industries where the chances for the native to earn to have a financial gains are in the 5 industries: the sports, entertainment, arts, and academics and research institutions. So he has 5 options, just like Rajnikant. And the question comes is, why was he chosen arts and entertainment. If you look in the fifth house, the fifth house lord is Sun. He is residing in its own house. Sun is residing in its own house, but it co-joined with Mercury and Venus. Mercury is communications, and which is the sixth house lord too. Sixth house is employment conditions. So the communications will be the part of his employment condition is to communicate very well. That's exactly what happened for him. And then Venus. Venus is the what you call the second house lord, Dhanasthanadipati. So when Mercury and Venus has co-joined, the communications lord and the Dhanasthanadipati, and Venus is also deals with arts, entertainment, and academics. Creativity. So this tells you that the native, out of 5 professions, there are 3 professions that the native can choose where he will become the richest person, which is arts, entertainment, and creativity. So the creativity does not have a specific thing. So you can have the creativity in sports, or you can have the creativity in entertainment. You can have the creativity in arts. So arts and entertainment is the 2 professions that the native has to choose if the native wants to become move from a lower end of the financial gain to the higher end of the financial gain. So this itself tells you like what profession would be very helpful for a native to have a change in the financial spectrum is what you can see through Indu Lagna. It's like if there are people who can say that, oh, I have chosen this profession but I couldn't make any money, maybe because through Indu Lagna, that's not the right profession that the native has chosen. And the next thing here is Aries. So who is the 10th house? First of all, the 9th house lord is Jupiter. The most benefic planet here again is Jupiter, and Jupiter is the Bhagyasthanadipati, the most best planet is owning the best house, Bhagyasthanama. And then the 10th and 11th houses lord is Saturn. Saturn is in the 7th house from Indu Lagna. That means Saturn is having a direct aspect on Indu Lagna. That's number 1. And Saturn's third aspect is on Bhagyasthanama, number 2. So the 10th and 11th house lord is looking at the first house and the 9th house, the most important things that we have to keep in mind. And then Saturn's 10th aspect is on Cancer, where the 9th house lord Jupiter is residing. So the 10th and 11th house lord, the career, the financial gains is through career. It's clearly visible here through career, and it is clearly visible by the chart that the financial gains will be something that's related to arts and entertainment, that has a very high end skills of communications. The native will have a high end skills of communications, and which is through arts, entertainment, and creativity is another strong point for this particular native. And the Saturn, that 11th house Labhasthanadipati, is looking at Bhagyasthanamo. He's looking at the Dhanusthanamo, the Lagna, the first house is the Dhanusthanamo, and he's looking at Jupiter, who is the lord of the 9th house, that is Bhagyasthanadipati. So when Labhasthanadipati is looking at Bhagyasthanamo, Bhagyasthanadipati, and the Dhanusthanamo, the native, it clearly tells that the native, whatever the native earns, is completely through self-struggle. You can see here that there is no inheritance of wealth for this particular native, is because the second house is the one that tells you the wealth accumulation, at least through inheritance. And you do not see anything here because in the second house Rahu is having a direct aspect. So that tells you that even if the native has inherited any property, it would not have stayed, it would not have been a stable amount, it would not have been stable with him for a longer time. So let's go and look at the Vimshottari Dasa. Like I said, this particular native's Jupiter Mahadasa started in 1977 May. And look at it. It started in 1977 May. He joined the Film Institute in 1976. So when the opportunity is about to happen, Jupiter is not the most important thing here. Is Jupiter. Jupiter always sends a signal way ahead to the native, indicating what type of that there is an opportunity that's going to happen, is coming, and allows, it's the planet, allows the native to figure it out whether to choose, accept the opportunity or reject it. Like I said earlier, planetary combinations only provide the opportunities, and it is up to the native to take the opportunity, use it or lose it. Here, this particular native, the Jupiter Mahadasha started in 1977, and to the best of my knowledge, all the way till 1999, the native was in the top position in the movie industry in South India especially, and of which 16 years is the whole Jupiter period. So the whole Jupiter period is the time when the native has shined in his profession, and that is the time when he had an amazing amount of financial gains. So the from Indu Lagna, like I said, let me repeat one more time. From the Indu Lagna, the 10th and 11th house lord is Saturn, who is having a direct aspect on the first house. That's one positive point for this native. Second, the Saturn's 10th aspect is on Cancer, where the 9th house lord Bhagyasthanadipati Jupiter is residing. Saturn's third aspect is on the 9th house itself, and above all, the most important thing here is Lagnadipati. Indu Lagnadipati is Mars. Mars, if you look at it, Mars' 7th aspect. Mars' 7th aspect is on Labhasthanamo. So the Indu Lagnadipati is looking at the Labhasthanamo, and the Labhasthanadipati is looking at Bhagyasthanamo and is looking at Bhagyasthanadipati. So the whole, it became like a strong bondage between the Labhasthanamo and the Bhagyasthanamo with respect to Indu Lagnadipati, and that tells you that the native, whatever the native earns, what are the financial gains that the native makes in his or her life is always through self-struggle. If there's a chances are extremely close to zero for this particular native to accumulate wealth through inheritance or maybe through lotteries or any of those things. No, the chances are zero if for this type of people. Let me go and see for this particular native how are the Kendra and Trikona houses. Like I did for the earlier native Rajnikant, let's go and look for this particular native, another South Indian actor, Chiranjeevi. The first house, let's start with the first house, Indu Lagna. The Lagnadipati is Mars. First house is empty. But in the 7th house, you have the 10th and 11th house Lord Saturn residing in the 7th house, having a direct aspect on the first house. So the 10th house Lord is looking at the first house, tells you that the Indu Lagna, that the 10th house is very, very strong for this particular native, which is career. So now let's not worry about what is the career for this particular native. We'll assume that we don't know anything about this particular guy. The 4th house. The 4th house Lord is Mercury. The 4th house, you see Jupiter, who is the Bhagyasthanadipati. Jupiter is residing in the 4th house. So the 9th house Lord is the Trikona Sthanadipati. The 9th house Lord Jupiter is residing in the 4th house. And 9th house is the Bhagyasthanama. And now, is anybody aspecting it? Yeah, Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 4th house. So the 10th house Lord is now looking at the Bhagyasthanadipati Jupiter, who is residing in one of the Kendra houses. So the Trikonadipati Jupiter is residing in a Kendra house, and the Kendradipati Saturn is looking at the Trikonadipati Jupiter, and Jupiter is the Bhagyasthanadipati too. Next comes the 7th house. Venus is the lord of the 7th house. Yep, 10th house lord, 10th and 11th house lord, career and Labhasthanadipati Lord Saturn is residing in the 10th house, and if you look at it, Saturn is exalted there. So the 10th house Lord being exalted from Indu Lagna, and the 11th house Lord being also being the 11th house Lord exalted, is a very strong point for this particular native to be successful in his career, and all the financial gains that the native is going to have is only through his career. The next comes is 10th house. Saturn is the lord of the 10th house, and oh, another thing for the Jupiter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. So Saturn is the lord of the 10th house here. Jupiter cannot aspect it. Jupiter is in Jupiter's 5th aspect will be there, not the 10th. Okay, so Jupiter is not going to aspect Saturn at all. And then comes the Trikona houses. Sun is the lord of the 5th house. Wow. In the 5th house, you see Sun, Mercury, Mars and Venus are residing. You can take one at a time. Mars is the Lagnadipati from Indu Lagna. Mercury is the 6th house lord. Fine, no need to worry. Venus is the Dhanasthanadipati, 2nd house lord. And fortunately, no planet is aspecting Jupiter, that 5th house. That's another beauty part of it. You have 4 important planets there, and fortunately, no planet is aspecting it. Especially malefic planet. No malefic planet is aspecting it. That's the great thing here when it comes to the 5th house. The next thing that you have to look at is the 9th house. Jupiter is the lord of the 9th house. The 9th house is empty. No need to worry. But Saturn's 3rd aspect is on the 9th house. Remember, Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 4th house, where the 9th house lord Jupiter is residing. Saturn's 3rd aspect is on the 9th house. Of course, it is empty. So Saturn, the 10th house lord, exalted 10th and 11th house lord Saturn is now having a full control with respect to Jupiter when it comes to Bhagyasthanamo. So it's clearly visible without any doubt that this particular natus, the financial gains, the wealth accumulation, everything is with respect to his career. Let's not worry about what his career is at this point. So that's the most important thing that I want to tell here with respect to Kendra and Trikona houses and lords with respect to Indu Lagna for this particular native. The third example that I'm taking for to analyze how Indu Lagna is helpful for a native to have to reach to have a change in the financial status on a positive side is the third example is the US President Barack Obama. He was the US President from 2008 to 2016, and I'm using his birth chart to explain how, with respect to Jupiter and Indu Lagna, how the Jupiter Mahadasa has helped this particular native to move from his financial situation to one of the most richest person on the earth. I think no one on this planet needs to give an introduction about this gentleman, one of the best in my opinion. And so from a career perspective, he was from 1997 to 2004 he was Illinois senator. From 2005 to 2008 he was a US senator, and in 2008 he became the US president all the way till 2016. So if you look at from the career from 1997 till 2016 is when he was in one of the most known person in US politics. I used the Astro Data Bank information, and using JHora I calculated the birth chart and also the Indu Lagna. For this native, Mr. Obama, US President Obama, the Indu Lagna is Capricorn. So if you look at it, oh my gosh, that's the reason. Okay, if you look at it, the Rashi Lagna is Capricorn. The Indu Lagna is also Capricorn. I'm sure you guys have noticed this one. That's one of the amazing. Okay, from astrological perspective, it really excited me to see the chart that the Rashi Lagna and the Indu Lagna are same. And here you see the Indu Lagnadipati is Saturn, and Saturn is residing in his own house, and the Dhanasthanadipati from Indu Lagna is again Saturn. So the Dhanasthanadipati and the Lagnadipati is Saturn residing in its own house. Remember, Saturn is a natural malefic planet. So the chances for this particular native is dropped by at least 50% to become a multimillionaire. And that's mainly because of this particular Saturn. And now let's go and look at what are the other things that we can see for this particular native. The most important thing that you can see here is Saturn inclination is only 2 degrees in retrograde motion. That means the Saturn did the forward motion, was static for some time, and then started going in retrograde motion. So with just 2 degree of retrograde motion indicates that Saturn is very close to static. The Saturn is this is equivalent to being a static Saturn. As I said earlier in one of my presentation, static Saturn is the most powerful planet on any natal chart, especially when it owns the Lagna, and here it owns the Lagna, it is in Lagna, and it owns the Dhanasthanam. So that clearly tells you that the most powerful planet is owning the first house and owning the Dhanasthanam. Now residing in the first house, it is having a direct aspect on the 7th house. So when you go and look at the 7th house, the 7th house of the 7th house lord is moon. That's fine. So in the 7th house, what you see is Mercury. Mercury is again communications, and Mercury is now the lord of the 9th house. Bhagyasthanadipati is Mercury. So the Saturn is directly the Dhanasthanadipati, and Dhanasthanadipati Saturn is having a direct aspect on the Bhagyasthanadipati Mercury, which is nothing but communications. So the financial gains for this particular native is mainly only through communications. So it can be any sort of a communication. Now that I said that it is through any sort of a communication, as far as to the best of my knowledge, he became a millionaire after his first book was published, and it was one of the top seller in Amazon. I think The Audacity, something like that, or My Father's Dream, My Dreams of My Father, something like that, one of those two books. And writing a book and publishing it and making money is nothing but communications. Again comes under the umbrella of communications. And when did this happen? His Jupiter Mahadasha started in 1996 and went all the way till 2012. If you look at it, he became the Illinois senator in 1997. Jupiter Mahadasha started in 1996 and he became an Illinois senator in 1997. Exactly. So it is again the best benefic planet. Jupiter is the one that is helping again this particular native to move from rags to riches. Okay, so here Jupiter is in the first house. Again, remember, just like for Rajnikant, Jupiter is again in the first house from Indu Lagna, and Jupiter also co-joined with the first house lord Saturn. Another thing, that means just like Saturn, Jupiter is also looking at the Mercury, and Mercury is the 9th house lord, and Mercury deals with communications. So when you look at this, the reason why the native has become a millionaire, mostly the possibility for the native to become a millionaire is only through some sort of a communication, relying on something that has a direct relationship with communication industry. The communication can be through TV, a TV host, or a movie actor, or a orator. Oh yeah, by the way, he was an orator, and yeah, I don't know whether he charged for talking, giving speeches, but he wrote a lot of books. And all the money that he earned is mainly by selling the books that he wrote it. Let's go and look at the Kendra and Trikona houses for this particular native again. The first house lord is Saturn. Saturn is residing in its own house. That's a very beauty part of it. And then since it is residing in its own house in the first house, it's going to have a direct aspect on the 7th house and the 10th house. In the 7th house, you have Mercury and Sun. Okay, and Mercury is the 9th house lord. So the Lagnadipati is looking at the Bhagyasthanadipati. The most important thing here is the Lagnadipati is looking at the Bhagyasthanadipati. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, Saturn is also looking at Sun, which is the 8th house lord, and Sun is bitter enemy. So when it looks at the Bhagyasthanadipati Mercury, because it is also looking at its bitter enemy, the possibility is high for the Lagnadipati Saturn not to support the Bhagyasthanadipati Mercury with all with the full strength, because Sun, it's his bitter enemy is with co-joined with the Bhagyasthanadipati Mercury. The next is the 4th house. The 4th house lord is Mars. 4th house is empty. Fortunately, no planet is aspecting the 4th house. The next comes the 7th house. 7th house lord is Moon. Moon is in the 5th house. There's no need to worry. And 5th house is Trikona. So Moon, the Kendradipati, is residing in the Trikona house, 5th house. Good. And then Saturn and Jupiter are the only two planets that are directly aspecting the 7th house. Comes to the 10th house. The 10th house lord is Venus. 10th house is empty, and Saturn with its 10th aspect is looking at the 10th house. So Saturn is now looking at the 7th house and the 10th house. Fortunately, the 10th house is empty. The 3rd house is also empty. Oh, by the way, the Saturn's 3rd aspect is on the 3rd house. The 3rd house lord is Jupiter, and Jupiter is co-joined with Saturn again. So Saturn now controls the 1st house, the 2nd house, because it has co-joined with the 3rd house lord, and it is looking at the 3rd house. It will again control the 3rd house. It is having a direct aspect on the 7th house, and where the 9th house lord is residing, and it is having a 10th aspect on the 10th house. So that's a strong point here for the Saturn. And then comes the Trikona houses. The 5th house lord is Venus. Venus, and Moon is residing in Venus. And the beauty part is Jupiter is aspecting the 5th house. With its 5th aspect, it is looking at the 5th house, Moon. So Jupiter's 5th aspect on Moon is who owns the 7th house is another good thing for this particular native. And you will see that because of that, one of the reason the Jupiter Mahadasa, the native had shined so much in his motherland. Then comes the 9th house. The 9th house lord is Mercury. Oh yeah, Mercury is the lord. Even though the 9th house is empty and no planet is aspecting the 9th house, we know that Saturn is aspecting Mercury, the 9th house lord. The last example I want to take in this presentation is my own chart, just to tell that with Jupiter Mahadasa running between the age of 16 and 46, and Jupiter having a direct relationship with Indu Lagna, how my life has turned from being a common man to settling in United States. I started my career somewhere in 1984 as a laboratory assistant after I got my bachelor's degree in sciences from Osmania University. And at that time in 1984, my monthly income as a lab assistant was 100 Indian rupees. At that time in 1984, it was 100 Indian rupees, and I have to work 14 hours a day, even though theoretically we were told to work 8 hours, but practically 14 hours a day plus 3 to 4 hours for going from home to the industrial zone and coming back. So almost 18 hours a day is what I did is what I worked for just $100 a month. That's how I started my career, and here today I am. So I figured it out what was the reason for my financial situations to change from such a low end of the spectrum to the medium end of the spectrum. I'm not on the high end, I'm not a millionaire, but still there should be some reason to change, to move from so low end of a spectrum to medium high spectrum. And here I'm going to explain to you how Indu Lagna and the Jupiter Mahadasa had made this happen. First and foremost, when I calculated the Indu Lagna through Jhora software, I found out that it is Taurus. That means which is the 7th, 8th and 9th house from Rashi Lagna. The Bhagyasthanamu from Rashi Lagna is the Indu Lagna. So in 9th house, in Indu Lagna, there are 4 planets in my birth chart. Moon, Sun, Mars and Mercury. So when it comes to when there are multiple planets in the Indu Lagna first house, there are multiple opportunities and multiple ways for the native to uh, have a better financial gains. So there's some sort of a financial achievement in his or her life. That's the very first thing. So, and the second house is Venus is there. Indu Lagnadipati is Venus. The first house lord in according to Indu Lagna is Venus, and Venus is in the second house, which is the Dhanasthanamo. So when Lagnadipati is in the Dhanasthanamo, that's another positive sign for the native to show that there is a possibility for the native to have some sort of a financial gains. And here in the first house, when you look at it, the second house lord Mercury is in the first house. So there is a Parivartana Yoga between the first house lord and the second house lord with respect to Indu Lagna. And then Mars is the seventh house lord, Moon is the third house lord, and Sun is the fourth house lord. So from Indu Lagna, the fourth house is Sun, because the fourth house lord is residing in the first house, co-joined with the second house lord. The financial gains will be through home life environment, automobiles, which is the fourth house deals with automobiles, and also basic education, with respect to basic education and other things here. And then let's go and look at the ninth house. The ninth house lord is Saturn. The 10th house lord is Saturn, and that Saturn is residing in the 10th house. So the Labhasthanadipati, Bhagyasthanadipati, 9th house lord Saturn is residing in the career. So the Bhagyasthana move for me, this chart is my chart. So the Bhagyasthanadipati, because it's in 10th house, it tells you that the career, through career is the only way for me to make the earnings, the financial, whatever the financial status changes is only through career. And the 11th house lord is Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the 12th house from Indu Lagna, but Saturn's third aspect is on the Jupiter. So that means the 10th house, 9th house lord is looking at the 11th house lord Jupiter. So remember, as I said earlier, any relationship with Jupiter is always good when the Jupiter Mahadasa is running. Okay, so let's go and look at the Jupiter Mahadasa. Jupiter Mahadasa started in 1986 and it lasted all the way till 2002. Remember, I told you that I started my career in 1984 after I got my bachelor's degree as a laboratory assistant. So from 1984 to 1986, it was a mess. So forget about what happened in my life at that time. So in 1986 is when, I think in 1986, 1986-87 is when I got my master's degree, and in exactly 1988 December or 1989 January, I went to Bombay in search of a job. So if you look at the Vimsotari Dasa, it is Jupiter Mahadasa and Saturn Antardasa. Exactly. Saturn Antardasa started in 1988 December, and I went to Bombay in 1989 January, 1 month later. And Saturn is the 9th and 10th house lord, and Jupiter Mahadasa, the 11th house lord Mahadasa is running. This is all with respect to Indu Lagna. And that's I went to Bombay in 1989 January, and I got my first job in Dubai. That's the biggest change in my life, financially, professionally, from all perspectives. So you can see that how the Indu Lagna, with respect to Indu Lagna, how Jupiter, the 11th house lord Jupiter, the final Labhasthanadipati Jupiter, when the Labhasthanadipati Jupiter's Mahadasa is running, when the 9th Bhagyasthanadipati Saturn's Antardasa started, the financial status, my financial status has changed from the lower end of the spectrum to the higher end of the spectrum. This is my own chart. So let me go and see from Indu Lagna what are the Kendra houses and Trikona houses. The Indu Lagna is Taurus. So in the first house itself, Venus is the lord for the first house, and in the first house itself I have Moon, Sun, Mercury and Mars. There are 4 planets residing in the first house. That is the strongest point with respect to Indu Lagna is having 4 planets, but unfortunately Sun is a malefic, defaulted malefic, and Mars is violent, and the only thing that I have is Moon and Mercury are the benefics here. And then the other thing is the benefic is Mercury is the second house lord, the Sthanadipati residing in the first house is another positive from Indu Lagna. And fortunately no planet is aspecting, ignore the Ketu aspecting the no planet is aspecting the first house, so forget it. That's another positive thing that I have to talk about. And then comes the fourth house. Sun is the lord of the fourth house, it's empty, but the ninth and the 10th house lord Saturn is having a direct aspect on the fourth house. That is the biggest draw. The ninth house is Kendra and the 10th house is ninth house is Trikona and the 10th house is Kendra. The Saturn is the Trikonadipati and the Kendradipati, and Saturn is residing in the Kendra house, in its own house, and now is having a direct aspect on another Kendra house, which is the fourth house, that is owned by his bitter enemy Sun. So that's the reason why whenever there is a kojo, any relationship between Sun and Saturn is always troublesome with respect to Indu Lagna. That means some sort of a financial hurdles will happen with respect to the fourth house. The next is the seventh house. Mars is the lord of the seventh house from Indu Lagna, and the house is empty. And since Sun, Moon, Mercury and Mars are residing in the first house, they are having a direct aspect on the seventh house. The next is the 10th house. Saturn is the lord of the 10th house and Saturn is residing in its own house. That's the beauty, that's the most positive side of her in my chart. From with respect to Indu Lagna is the 10th house lord is residing in its own house and no planet is aspecting the 10th house. That's another positive sign. So next comes the Trikona houses. The Trikona houses 5th and 9th. 5th one, the lord is Mercury, 5th house is empty and no planet is aspecting that 5th house too. So Mercury residing owning the 2nd and the 5th houses is now in the first house, and fortunately no malefic planet is aspecting the 5th house, but there is a malefic planet residing in the 2nd house, the Dhanasthanama, which is Rahu. That clearly tells you that the wealth accumulation is not going to be fixed. It sometimes the native me, I will be acquiring wealth and then I will lose it and then again start from the scratch and start acquiring the wealth, again lose it. It's like a sine wave going up and down. The Trikona house is the 5th. The next one is the 9th house. Saturn is the lord of the 9th house. 9th house is empty and no planet is aspecting. So if you look here, one thing is Saturn being the Bhagyasthanadipati and the 10th house lord is one reason why my whole career is serving in a foreign country. That's the main reason why my earnings is in a foreign country, the career is in a foreign country. And then the Lagna, the most important thing is Saturn is from the 10th aspect is looking at the fourth house, which is the motherland, and it is owned by its bitter enemy. That's another reason why I could not settle in my motherland. That means Saturn is forcing me to leave the motherland in the name of career for the sake of a job and settle outside the motherland. That's another reason why you can see it from here, why I was being outside the country since 1989 and settled in abroad. That's what you can see here in my notes, saying that this is the biggest drag is because Saturn's direct aspect is on a house that is owned by his bitter enemy. Until now, I did the analysis of the past events that had happened to explain how the Indu Lagna and its relationship with the 9th, 10th house lord, 11th house lord and Jupiter, how it has changed the native's life with respect to finances. And here the next what I'm going to do is how can you predict it. So I will just give you the using my own chart. I'm going to do some predictions. So my Saturn's, according to Vimsothiridasa, my Saturn Mahadasa is going to end in 2021 November. So the next Mahadasa that's going to start is Mercury. Mercury Mahadasa starts in 2021 and it will last all the way till 2038. It's almost like how many? 16 years? 17 years. 17 years. So in these 17 years, Mercury Mahadasa, let's go and look at what is Mercury with respect to Indu Lagna. With respect to Indu Lagna, Mercury is the second and the fifth house lord. Second house is Dhanasthanamo. Fifth house is again arts, entertainment, sports and education, academics or research. So these are the 5 places, 5 industry sites that deals with Mercury. Mercury owns these are. Okay, so Mercury means communications again. Now there is a Parivartana Yoga between the first house lord and Venus and Mercury, the second house lord. So Venus deals with creativity again, design and creativity, and Venus is also the sixth house lord from Indu Lagna. So sixth house deals with employment conditions. So any of sorts of the financial gains that's going to happen during this Mercury Mahadasa, it through communications, design, creativity, and that is very close to arts, entertainment, academics and research. So there's so much of things, and all these things are with respect to the employment only, because Venus is the sixth house lord. Keep that in mind. And there's no possibility for me to go into business because the seventh house lord is Mars, and even though Mars is in the Indu Lagna and directly looking at the seventh house, Mars is also the 12th house lord, is unexpected expenditures. So if I tend to go towards business during this period, there is a high possibility for me to incur unexpected expenditures, and that might slow down my financial gains. So to maximize my financial gains, the only option I have here is to stick to my employment, be an employer and continue as an employee rather than as a businessman. Self-employed business means work for someone and give that opportunity using the creativity and the design knowledge that I gained and the communication skills that I had. Use it in the industries like art, entertainment, sports, which I'm surprised that I have that sports too, and academics and research. So out of these 5 industries, one of the industries is the one where during this Mercury Dasa is where I'm going to have a positive impact with respect to the financial status of my current one. Keep in mind, this is just through Indu Lagna, is my prediction from 2021 to 2038. But we cannot stop here. We have to look at the D1 chart and either check out, is the possibility for this native to be alive? What is the longevity of this particular native? That is my longevity. And will I be alive all the way till 2038 or not? If that doesn't show up, if there's any chance for me not to be alive till 2038, then these predictions, even though there's a possibility, since the native is not alive, all those possibilities will be wasted off. So let me give the conclusion or the summary so that those who are interested can listen to the summary at first, and then if they are interested they can watch the video completely, or those who have already watched the video completely can recap what is the summary from this long video. Here basically what I want to tell here is that if by calculating the Indu Lagna using Jhora software, find out what is the Indu Lagnadipati, and if there is any relationship between Jupiter and Indu Lagna, that is the first house, or Indu Lagnadipati, or the house owned by the Indu Lagna, if there is any sort of a relationship, then the chances are extremely high for that particular native to have a positive increase in his or her financial status only during the Jupiter Mahadasa. If this is happening in if there is a relationship between Indu Lagna and or the Indu Lagnadipati with Jupiter, and Jupiter Mahadasa does not, if the native do not have the Jupiter Mahadasa during his or her lifetime, then the chances are close to zero. So the Maharaja Yoga or Viparita Raja Yoga for a native with respect to Indu Lagna is highly possible only if Jupiter is the during the Jupiter Mahadasa Vimsotari Dasa period. Thank you for watching this video, and if this is the first time you are listening it, thanks a lot.